you can't really generalize. You can't really at all. After I talked about, though, there was a girl named Michelle who just appeared out of nowhere one day. She'd only been in Australia for 3 days. Companion found her on the bus and talked to her, and she was really hesitant. She said, "No, I don't know if this is for me. Don't make me do anything, okay? I just want to see." And then she didn't give us her number, but then she texted us later on and said, "Guess who this is?" I was like, "We have no idea who this is." She said, and we talked to millions of people, and she said, "Oh, it's Michelle." I'm like, okay. No, it took a couple times for us to see her. Like, the first time we invited her to church, and she lived like half an hour away, walking, I mean, from the church. And she's a student. She didn't have a car or anything. And so, one time, just in church, it was the first time she was supposed to be there, and it was like 10 minutes before the meeting was supposed to start. She said, "Can you come pick me up? I've been like wandering around for like an hour and I can't find it." And I'm like, "Oh no, what are we supposed to do? We can't pick up investigators, but like everyone's at church already." And so we're like, "Oh, we're so sorry." I felt so bad for her because it's so easy to lose investigators. And then she was like, "Oh, okay, I'll just walk home." And she's just like wandering somewhere in the city. And we were like, "Oh no, what did we do?" The next week was general conference, and we had her get a ride and stuff, and she stayed. It seemed like she was interested. We were talking to her, and just during the first lesson, she didn't seem to understand very much, but she said, "So, how do I join this church?" And we were just like, "Oh, okay, you're just one of those. You're just going to ask us how we join this church." And so we were just like, "Well, we could talk about baptism." So we talked about it. Just like, "Okay." We're like, "So what do you think about that?" And she said, she wasn't going to tell us. She was going to do anything. No, we had a couple of events going on, and and then I asked her again, after we'd been teaching her for a little bit, I said, "So have you thought about baptism?" No, she actually attended a baptism, and she said, I can't tell you." She's going to tell us what she was going to tell us, apparently. And some interesting things happened. She ran into a guy who had gone to a local ward that was Chinese, and he asked her out at one point. And was able to tell her a little bit about his experience being a convert to the church and getting baptized. And it was just a couple of days later, she gave us a phone call, and she said, "You know what? I've decided that I do want to be baptized on Mother's Day." Oh, so wow, she's really good at making decisions, isn't she? And she was just such a miracle. I'm not saying that every Chinese person is like that at the very beginning. But since then, she's been probably the most active out of like any active person that I know in the church, doing everything that she wants. And she had such a strong testimony. Immediately brought one of her friends to church and was able to get her baptized. And her friend's also a really great member now. But I know just seeing that was able to help me realize that, it's, even though not everybody, will just stay like that and stick like glue, but at the same time, you really don't know what to expect. But seeing that really builds your testimony. I do feel like she's one of the big blessings of the mission, is being able to see that person, pretty much fully coming to Christ. Pretty much, most of my mission, since I'm not a very relaxed person, I'd be judging myself. I'd always be easily irritated, and I try not to, because when you try to smile and you're sharing something every day that you love, and I love doing it, for sure. But at the same time, I got tired of it sometimes, and there's just no break. There's no break from the beginning to end. You just kind of go on and you keep going week after week and day after day. And so, like it wasn't until I was at least 3/4 done with my mission. And I had been up in a country town for a while, and at points, I thought I was just going crazy. And I probably was. It's just, I hadn't had the success that I wanted as a missionary. I thought that every missionary should at least go home with a baptism. And, some great thing happened to them. I was just waiting for that to happen. And I wasn't always getting along with my companion, and I just felt very much alone. When you're in a small town, there's no missionaries that you ever see ever. We had district meetings on the phone, and usually couldn't hear people because their phones wouldn't work very well. So I was just really stressed out over a lot of things, and I was wondering why I was there. And I think that God was able to answer me in a very slow but precise way when I decided I wanted to pray a lot. And it was about before in my mission, I kind of felt like, well, I guess I could just you don't have to pray all the time. You don't have to pray when you're leaving the house or the car or going up to every door. Like, well, some people just overdo it. And I decided, well, you have to. You have to depend on God for everything. Because if I don't have that, then what do I have? I'm just here being crazy by myself and with this other crazy guy. And I don't know, like, we tracted pretty much all the time. And even though I like tracting, it wasn't bearing much fruit, and everybody else was saying, hey, just stop doing it. It's not even effective anymore. And there was this one time, I don't know what happened that day, but I looked down the street that we were at, because nobody was home during the day, because everyone's out working. And I said, this is it. We're going to have a miracle here. And I don't know if I believed that when I said it. And we kind of just tracked it on the doors there. One of the houses, well, we just talked to them like we talked to everybody else. And then they offered a drink. And it just happened that me and my companion were fasting. And so I was like, oh no, what do we do? But I decided to break my fast and say, yes, I did want something. And he let us in. And that was the first time I was let in on my mission. And I decided to go with it. I was really surprised. When we got in there, they didn't look like, Mormon family at all. Like, it was a little bit scary for me. It's not something you expect. I mean, they were just, doing things that people in the church wouldn't do. And then the mother just came over and just sat down with us and just said, okay, what makes your church different? Because she'd gone through a lot of other churches. And the Jehovah's Witnesses are pretty big in that area of the world. Like, they've been to everyone's house. So everyone who thinks of missionaries thinks of them. So I have to mention that you're a Mormon and not a Jehovah's Witness so that they know what you're talking about. But anyway, we taught them, and then they invited us back at the end. And that was the first time that ever happened to me as well. Obviously, because it's the first time I've been led into a house while I was tracting, but they said, come back. And they were just the nicest people I'd ever met. And I was saying, well, I mean, they're actually pretty different. Most Aussies wouldn't just let us in like that and feed us like they did. And she was willing to feed us many times. And even though they weren't immediately interested in what we were doing, we kept coming back, and it was very slow. So months had gone by, and a lot of disasters happened. Disasters just randomly happened to people. But I think they'll come around. They still haven't completely come around. I actually just got an email from them a couple weeks ago just saying that they'd gone to church for the first time. And that was really inspiring to me. It's been 10 months since that happened, since I first met them. And I think that's the way God works with some people. It's just something I learned throughout my 2 years, is that God will take his time, and you have got to deal with it. And not just that, but you should deal with it happily, because God will always keep his promises. And you'll realize that after the fact. You're not going to realize it while it's happening, but you'll realize it after, whether it's a year or 2 years or 18 months or whatever. You're going to get the blessings that you needed, not necessarily what you expected. And so I do know that every promise in the scripture is true. And so, I mean, that family still has a long way to go. It had been 10 years since they had last seen Mormons, and that was an interesting experience that they had as well. They had missionaries come by and knock on the door, and they're totally atheists. Said, well, if God exists, why doesn't he just come by and help me with my chores tomorrow? And then the missionaries came back with the whole ward the next day, and they helped them with their lawn and their house and everything. And she said, wow, there are actually people that do this. Maybe God does exist. She had a Book of Mormon. She pulled it out and said, the missionaries that came by, they gave me this, and they told me to read something in it. And I just looked in there and said, 35:11, we wanted you to read that as well. And they didn't read that while I was there, but they've started to now. And I just know that you can see God working through these people when you meet them.